Today, I'm talking with Eric Daimler from Conexus. This is a really interesting conversation, and in a lot of senses, it shouldn't surprise me, but it does. Eric and I talked extensively about the work that he does and the work that I do with the Process Fixer when it comes to working inside companies and trying to help them automate their systems. Right now, there is a lot of deviation and sometimes hundreds of companies, hundreds of systems inside companies that aren't working together. They're working independently. People are putting data into multiple different places, and none of those systems are communicating back and forth. I thought this problem primarily was in the sub $1 billion market range. Eric has an interesting perspective because what he finds is the problems are very different when you get into the Fortune 1000 when it comes to data and how to apply AI to it. But in the end, it's really about not having congruent systems, not having harmony between the systems inside the company. And because there's a lack of harmony, there's a lack of automation, there's a lack of an ability of those companies to use the types of AIs that are coming out today to truly maximize the opportunities inside their organization. I think this is a really fascinating conversation. It's probably one of the ones that's most applicable to my day job as the process fixer. So I was really excited about this conversation and really excited to see what Conexus does in the next few years in their work in really helping these large data centers for big companies. If you're a large company or a small company, I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. Eric's a very, very bright guy. He's been around AI for a long time, and he's actually worked with the White House on these topics. So it's not just like he's a startup tech entrepreneur. This is a guy who has a prestigious career in working with these large systems. So here we go. Eric Daimler, Conexus. Welcome back. Today I have Eric Daimler with Conexus, and we were just laughing that that's a weird name because anybody that knows I have another podcast called Nexus Conexus, which is sort of a weird world. But Eric, welcome. Nice to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Conexus is Latin for join, and so we are generically the data integration business. So join in Latin is perfectly suited to what we do.
I believe that the ad agency that hired me for that other podcast probably didn't know that. They just thought it was cool that it rhymed with their name, Nexus. So Brett, Lisa, Amzi, if you're listening, you did good because you didn't just get it in this language. You got it in all.
Got it in Latin.
You got it in Latin, which is, now we can do a mass.
That's right.
We're good. I would love to hear more, Eric, and you're based out of San Francisco, right? We talked about the data piece, and anybody that knows me knows how important it is because so much of what I do is about data. It really is about trying to help organizations find that single source of truth amongst their data so that as things like AI come into this world, you got the ability to participate. And I think right now there's a lot of companies that don't because they just have 15 or 20 divergent systems and none of them speak to each other. So I'd love to talk about data and how the world of data looks right now and where it's going, particularly with AI and with what you're doing.
Yeah, I could take off what you just said. It's actually a really interesting dynamic where people appreciate that data is exploding, maybe exponentially. They may appreciate a little less that data sources are also exploding exponentially. Yes. This creates a combinatorial explosion at the intersection of data and data sources that really is knowledge. And that knowledge then expressed inside of a business finds some difficulty if what you're trying to find is the single source of truth, as you just said, a golden record. Because many of these companies will have different perspectives that are in some sense equally valid. If you're trying to put together an airplane, do you trust just the aerospace engineer? Well, you probably also want to trust the mechanical engineer. If you are running an oil rig, you have a petroleum engineer and a geologist, and also a mechanical engineer, maybe a civil engineer, an electrical engineer. There's no single source of quote unquote truth among those perspectives. They all have their own truth. The future that our generative AI works to reveal is what is the combination of all of those truths that doesn't diminish their nuance, that is really required in the fidelity for the safe operations of these increasingly complex systems.
We have a system right now. We're working with an ERP system with a client that, depending upon which way we run the data, we get different results. And it's like, okay, and there's logic and reason behind that. It's like the data that's included versus not included, and so now we feel like we have to tell two different stories, and maybe that's okay as long as we understand the interconnection between those two stories and where they diverge and the asymmetry between them.
It could be okay unless your life depends on it. This is the reason
it's a good point.
that things blow up. I can have a perspective that's in metric equivalent to imperial measurements, and those sort of measurements have literally cost lives. There are today hundreds of millions of euros for one of our clients in Europe being spent on these conversions, not just of distances and weights, but also of currencies, of dates. And you think, well, these are just completely transparent and easy and mathematical equations that couldn't be easier, but they're often not represented in databases in a clear way. And misinterpretations can happen all the time. In a better, life-changing example, you imagine if we flew a commercial aircraft where the fuselage, the engine, and the wing were not brought together with a respect to this variable called vibration, and somehow that measurement was characterized differently among those different teams.
Sure,
that's a big deal, right? And the interpretation of that knowledge is very often lost. What we do, what Conexus does, is our AI guarantees the integrity of that data so that you can depend on it with your life.
Look, if you think about this from a Six Sigma perspective, and this is the background that I sort of come from, of running operations in a very, very lean and efficient way. If you're in healthcare, if you are in aerospace, there's a few industries where I need precision to the I'm not just looking at one decimal point. I need to get out a few decimal points to make sure my precision is good. If you're a florist, you don't need 99.99976% precision. Not going from 96 to 98 is pretty good. And candidly, you're probably at about 60% right now. So if we can just move you to 80%, it's a radical alteration in your business. So do you find that in this data right now, in the precision of data, is it being focused on specific industries right now? Or is there an opportunity to extrapolate that in the future into all sorts of areas?
There are a lot of industries where precision matters. They're generally in engineering. So you think in anything regarding energy, anything regarding finance, of course, anything regarding healthcare, as you mentioned. Those are enormous industries by themselves where you really can't afford to have failures. You can't afford to have leaks. I worked in the White House as an AI authority some number of years ago, and we worked on some problems related to national defense, both for the United States and our allies. One error is not a good number. One error.
Yeah, when you're launching a missile, you want it to be, anybody who's ever shot an arrow from a bow and arrow knows that a fraction of an inch here is missing the barn, down the range a bit. So you're right. Is that from your experience with what you do with Conexus? I guess, how old are you, by the way? Are you? How long has Conexus been around?
Yeah.
And what is the type of practice of work that you're in?
Yeah, sure. We spun out of MIT in 2015. And early stages, it was doing a lot of research and exploration. It got its start with the U.S. Defense Department. That's really how I initially got acquainted with the work. We then turned it into a commercial operation and acquired outside funding through myself and then later friends of mine in 2019. So right before COVID, took us all for a spin. Yeah.
So you've been doing this. You're literally the grandfather of the industry.
Thank you. First of all, I don't think that I'm
not making a comment on your gray hair or anything. I'm literally just saying it's 2019. That's a relatively early point to start to think about commercially viable products.
I've been doing AI for 20 plus years. I mean, my PhD's in the area. But there's certainly people like Jeffrey Hinton that have been doing this longer than I have, or deserve all the credibility that they have, and certainly even others like Andrew Ng or Eric Xing, brilliant AI researchers that also have some fantastic commercial expressions. But yeah, I've done it for quite some time. I've seen some evolution in AI to its current expression in the kind of Hollywood-esque or telegenic generative AI of large language models. But what we're doing is we're doing stuff that large language models can't do, because the thing about large language models is every board has an urgency to be addressing generative AI somehow, exploring it in their business. But you can feed truth into a large language model and get back untruth, get back something that's not, you can't depend on it. We work at our generative AI with one of our large clients, Fortune 50 client says, is we are a generative AI for business rules, for business truth, things that you can bet your life on.
I have a startup in the space too that we're still in development on, but it is using the language models, the generative AI language models. And we have found that the more data we feed it, the less accurate it becomes, which is very interesting. It's like the larger the sample of written data that I give it, the less that it sounds like the original. When we've given it small pieces of data, it's very, very accurate. But I was like in healthcare and in engineering and all these areas, you've got to be very, very precise. So one of the things that we're seeing, and it would be interesting, it sounds like you're working a lot with a lot larger companies. I'm primarily consulting in that sub $1 billion range. And the real challenge that the companies have in there is that there's so many different sources, 10, 15, 20, 60 different places where data is stored. It's not communicating, because these aren't tech companies. These are companies, engineering firms are not really tech companies on the back of the house. They might have really cool software, but you go into accounting and there's still people printing checks and signing them, But what we're finding is there's just so much divergence in that I've been telling CEOs, it's like you've almost disqualified yourself for the ability to truly use AI, because you don't have data in any source where you can extract from it and determine what it actually means. Is that something that you're seeing? It sounds like the organizations you're working with are a little bit more progressive on that.
I would characterize as what you said as I think the world is actually even worse than what you just described, which is, and even for the larger organizations, I think what they're beginning to realize is that the systems are becoming too complex for them to reason about. Their world is actually becoming smaller in a sense, and they recognize that they can fool themselves by having a dashboard that tells them certain metrics, and maybe does that 2015 era AI, which is getting insights.
The whole BI stuff, right?
That's not where the power is going to reside. The power is going to reside with having these systems interact with each other. As you just mentioned, systems don't like to talk to each other. Every time we call a credit card company, enter our account number, and then have somebody else ask for what we just entered again, we know systems don't like to talk to each other. But inside large organizations, it's critical, because we need to be responding more quickly. To any sort of dynamics within an organization. What happens to supply chain? What happens with supply and demand to the customer? And that only happens when the databases can talk.
Boy, that is such a good point. I'm glad that you mentioned this example with like the bank. I gave a speech about 2 months ago to a large group of CFOs, and we talked about the concept of mechanical Turks and the story of the mechanical Turk, and where the Amazon mechanical Turk came from. And what a lot of people don't know, and I've worked inside these systems, is that some of those banks, the reason is because there's actually somebody, a physical person, listening to you say the numbers, looking them up in a database, and like giving you the information. Like it's crazy when you actually see behind the scenes when there's 10,000 people sitting in a call center listening to calls and going, oh, I think they mean this, and pressing the button. It's like there's an operator in between. You think it's voice prompt. It's not. It's just a dude listening to you and going, I think this is what he means, and sending you down another tree. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But this is what happened is I think it's a little bit of, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit of this lean startup mentality too that is integrated into the whole entire marketplace, where people said, well, instead of building it, let's try it this way. And then instead of stopping, which what they should have done is stopped and said, okay, now we know what we need. Now let's build the solution. They just put more people into the cogs of the wheel to try to give it the illusion. And, we walk into these places all the time and we pull back the curtains and there's a guy there saying, please ignore the man behind the curtain. Like, we don't want you to see this part of the business because we have the illusion of automation. We have the illusion of data centralization, and somebody's looking in an old Linux system to try to figure out what's happening.
It's really shocking how much data integration is still manual today in 2023.
Yes,
it impairs many businesses and maybe even the U.S. supply chain as a whole. It's a fragility that has to get addressed to be able to compete for the next decade.
It's really true. We're working on another book right now. My last book, Adapt Agility, came out a few months ago, but we're working on another book right now that talks about what percentage of the GDP do we believe is waste. And of a $23 trillion GDP, I think it's about 20% that could be automated. I think it's just mundane, repetitive. We've seen. I saw a financial services organization years ago that their underwriters had to enter the information into 14 different spreadsheets because there were different partners and board members that wanted to see reports in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what?
Yeah.
No, but I do believe, I think it's probably 20% of the GDP is just burned in waste and looking for things. If you ever observe a business, and this is something that we do a lot, I'll send observers into a business to observe things. And we find people walk around 20% of the time just trying to figure out where shit is. I'm like, just put it back in the same place every time and you would know. And then I'm looking for my glasses and I'm going, I have no idea where they are. This is the human condition that we are in and we can't get out of it.
Yeah. I don't know how, depending on how you'd characterize waste, that number can get very, very large. Really. I just think of our own business. We find that many of the people doing this manual work are really way overqualified. They can often have these titles of data science, but they're going to do these lower level data engineering tasks that are often just terribly mundane, and for which their degrees often were not required. It's
very true.
We have one client that is looking to repurpose hundreds of people and do better jobs, work that's more appropriate for their skill level. Hundreds of people is a lot of people, just replaced by AI. But everybody's thankful for it because it was work they didn't want to do anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, in the work that we do a lot, I ask employees all the time. I say, tell me what you're most proud of from your work here yesterday. And it's really shocking to me when you watch their eyes. And if you know anything about the way that human beings think, they are sitting there for a good 2 or 3 minutes, completely incapable of recalling any task that they performed the previous day. But then if I say, don't worry about that. What's a good place to eat lunch around here? Man, they can just jump right to it. They can tell you the menu. They'll tell you the pricing. Ask for so-and-so when you go in. I mean, it's really interesting how work has become sort of this cog, right, where we participate in it and we don't see all of the inefficiency in it. And that is really my hope for AI. It's to free human beings from being cogs in the wheel. And it sounds like that's a lot of the same work that you all are participating in.
That's actually what inspired me to be a computer scientist and pursue the specialization within AI 30 years ago, which is I saw an ability for computers. It may seem counterintuitive on its face, that allow computers to have us be more human, because they can just automate and allow us to express more of who we are. Who we want to be are people interacting with other people, right? We're going to social beings. We want to express empathy. We don't want to be sitting doing rote tasks in Excel.
No, absolutely. And it happens all the time. I mean, I just left a meeting before this where they said, we spend 80 hours a month for one of our accounting people to perform this task. And I looked at it and I said, number one, I have to have a developer look at this, but I believe this is just a basic automation in Excel. And they're like, no, it can't be that easy. And I'm like, the reason you're saying it can't be that easy is because you're spending 80 hours a month doing it right now. But what if it is? Wouldn't it be worth, what if it takes 80 hours to fix it? Okay, well then your ROI is 1 month. And I think that's the mentality. And I do believe that you're right. I always say businesses under $1 billion have this problem, but I also used to consult for Fortune 5s. They're probably worse in a lot of senses. I mean, I did work for a Fortune 5 where we did find $185 million overlooked opportunity, inside the organization. And they were just completely blind to it. They just couldn't even see it until it was pointed out to them. And they were like, we can't be spent. There's no way that oh my God, we're spending this much money.
We published one paper. It's actually public. You can look it up with one of our clients where we, in one of our products off our platform, in one of their business units, their number is we save them $58 million a year. These numbers get big very fast.
Yeah, and I think that's there is an incredible opportunity that's coming with AI because of this. Let's talk a little bit about how that evolves, because to me, I've been doing this kind of work for 25 years, but in a very granular, I still issue stopwatches to every employee, and I still issue the little manual counters. And I primarily do that because I found if they try to use the watch, they try to use the timer on here, their girlfriend will text them something, or their wife will say, get milk on, and then next thing you know, they forget. But I'm very much that geek in trying to understand that and help businesses with it. And I think AI is at this point where it can obviously help make some of that improvement. I think organizations have to get their data together in order to really be able to capitalize on this. But where do you see this going? I mean, we are still we're in the kindergarten pre-K stage here. I'm sort of feeling, what do you think?
Yeah. So, Conexus AI is built on a discovery in mathematics in this domain called category theory. So where my PhD was in ML, computational linguistics, and graph theory, related to that, you could say, is a more rich expression called category theory, which abstracts these business rules. That, I think, is really the next phase of AI. It's the what's next. It's a math that's more appropriate to a digital age than calculus or geometry or trigonometry, upon which many of these other models in software such as RDF-OWL are built. So with these expressions in category theory, we can scale symbolic AI. That's where we see a hybrid AI then emerging. We have a hybrid AI between the scalable symbolic, classical, good old-fashioned AI, and the more trendy, telegenic, I'll call it, probabilistic AI. You bring those together, and that will be the future. So Conexus AI provides the symbolic, scalable part, and then we integrate that in hybrid AI. So there'll be other people that do this. We just are fortunate to be recognized as a leader in that particular expression.
So where do you see this going then? Like, what is the next phase? I wanted to let you know that my 4th book just dropped this week. It's called Adapt Agility. It's a relatively short read, and I encourage you to pick it up and read through it. Right now, we are going through a period of time where change has become constant, and we have to prepare ourselves and our business for that new reality. With AI on the horizon, you have to be able to be agile and adaptable to the trends that are coming in the marketplace. I wrote this book specifically for you and for people that are interested in AI and need to understand how to prepare themselves and their business for the amount of change we're about ready to experience. Listen, we have evolved as a species over the course of a long period of time, and there are things that are intrinsic to our biology and our genome that we cannot overcome in just a single generation or so. With AI as prevalent as it is right now, it is critical that you pick this book up. It's about $8 over on Amazon, and I would encourage you to read it a couple of times, share it with your friends, and think long and hard about how to make change inside your organization in the era of AI. we as industry have gone from an artisan craft industry to mass production under Ford, to lean production under, I'm a disciple of Deming and, Tichy Ono and all those kind of folks, to this sort of lean startup model that looked more like we skipped leg day, right? Like we had this big mass on the top of like sales and marketing, and then these like two sticks for like the operations going down. So I'm like, we've gone to this point, and now I believe we're coming into the era of optimization, where it's even less about growing revenue and it's more about optimizing the business. When I see general contractors, for instance, we work with a lot of big general contractors, and they all believe that 3% margin is the number. They're just like, that's the standard. I'm like, well, what about 6? And they're like, no, that's just not possible. I'm like, but what if it is? They're like, no, well, 3 is the number. I'm like, but what about 4? Like, can we go to? It's the tipping point. It's like, could you go? And there's a restriction. There's bias, right? We have a worldview that tells us. I went to a conference and there were 300 contractors there, and they all said it was 3%, so it has to be 3%. So we've got to break through that as well to move into this sort of era of optimization. And I'm excited about what you're doing, because it sounds like we're vibing on the same channel here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of optimization that can happen.
And those margins, I feel like are a little lean. I mean, kind of depending on your industry, but there are car companies that have 28% margins, and even one famous car company that's a 43% margin on average 300 grand purchase prices. So these margins can increase. The difficulty sometimes about talking just around margin is the U.S. government may allow a 16% margin, but it's really a weird incentive structure where they would rather you do a 16% margin on 1,000 people than a 30% margin on a 500-person team. Even if you're going to save money, it's really kind of a misalignment of incentives.
Some of these contracts, you're right, and that is part of the challenge. Is some of these contracts are like cost plus as well.
Yeah.
So to become more efficient, I don't gain anything.
Yeah. I like what you're talking about, like leg day, missing leg day.
You love that. That's my whole analogy right now. Is
I think the
big huge guy on the top and the sticks.
The future is you have we'll say 3 choices in here. One of them is to not skip leg day. The equivalent in my world is you need to start being more specific. I'm going to say more quantitative, but it really is more specific or more clear about what your job is, and participate in the automation of your job. Because if you
100%.
don't participate in your automation, you really have 2 other choices. One is you're going to be shocked. You're going to be surprised. You're going to be displaced, and it's going to be unpleasant because it's going to happen abruptly. A lot of people talk about the world being faster. Maybe it is, but abruptness is really the name of the game. It's not that you lose your job. It's that you lose your job without warning, because the scalability of digital goods is fundamentally different than in physical goods. When something works, it works infinitely well. And I don't need to wait until Wednesday afternoon to eliminate a department once I've figured out how to automate it. So you need to participate in that automation. And how you do that is becoming more specific and experimenting with tools. The last thing you can say about that is, you're not going to be replaced by a robot. You're going to be replaced by a person using a robot. So you're either going to, you're going to participate, you're going to be displaced, or you're going to become an artisan. And there are places for that. There are places, there are niches that people can have good livings, good lifestyles, but it'll be a niche. Those are your 3 options going forward. So don't skip leg day.
I agree. The reality is you've got to, as an individual right now and as an organization, you have got to start adopting this concept of human hybridization in the form of augmentation. And listen, we all say, and I've said this on a recent podcast, I said, Elon, if you're listening, I will take the first Neuralink in my brain, because I look at it and I go, I'm only 3 centimeters away right now, right? I mean, it's already pushing against my brain. Just to move it inside would save me the hand motion of doing this. And I know that sounds scary to a lot of people, but it really is about thinking about a technology like cell phones and saying, 20 years ago, we all laughed and said we wouldn't do this. Well, guess what? We are doing it. It's going to be the same thing down the road, because we will see augmented individuals be 100 or 1,000 times more efficient.
When I was in the White House, I was active in working to get people into the conversation about AI. To address your point, people need to be part of the conversation. But no matter how loud I would yell, I never was as effective as the introduction of ChatGPT. I am grateful for its introduction in this world, because there's nothing like that to have been able to catalyze everybody's participation in this conversation about what our future will look like.
It really is true. And I think if you're a CEO or leader that's watching this right now, you've heard me say it before. Brene Brown, I think, sums it up really, really well. It is not the story. It is the story you tell yourself. And if you are not talking to your people about how AI is going to affect your business, they're making up the story. They're hearing on the news that 80% of salespeople will be eliminated, all these things, and they're living in that state of fear. And I talked about this. This is my last book. It's all about human evolution and how it affects our ability to resist. We want to resist change because we see it as a wild bear coming into camp at night. We haven't evolved a system where we separate out those instinctive models from other things that look and smell the same. Change is dangerous from a human evolution perspective. So we as leaders have to be leading that conversation, and we have to be preparing ourselves for this, but also making sure our people understand this isn't about vast elimination. This is about retooling our business so that they can be more efficient and they can be more effective and they can do the kind of work that they want to do, not the kind of work that's mundane and can be done by machines.
Yeah, responsiveness and agility, I really hear as the call words of the careers of the future, and the organizations that are able to structure themselves so that they can respond most quickly to the changes in the environment are the ones that are going to be the best placed.
I got to tell you a funny story about writing this book is that I wrote the book, I gave it to ChatGPT, and I said, create the name for this book using no word that's ever been used before. And I always call her she came back with the word adaptagility. It was never she's like, it's a combination. What you need to deal with me is you have to be highly adaptable and highly agile. And adaptable, those two words are interesting because agile means I need to be able to move quickly. So if something's coming my way and I need to be able to dodge it is one thing. The first part of that, the adaptation, is actually letting it hit you in the chest and become part of you. So you got to be a little bit of both. You got to know which things to let hit you in the chest and become part of you, and which things to say, you know what, we're just not going to do that right now and dodge out of the way. So we do have to make these organizations that are like that. And let's just be honest. I mean, change is very, very difficult. Gardner says 34% of corporate change initiatives that are launched, only 34% hit their objectives. So 66% of the change initiatives we start in organizations fail. So we're pushing the water uphill here just to start. Yeah. I mean, we got some work to do. But I think with what you're doing, though, being able to categorize the dollars and cents, if you know the money before you get started, it's a little different. If the board knows we're going to save $58 million by going this direction, they're highly motivated based upon their shares to do that.
That wasn't even the biggest number. We save 58 million, and that's only in the person hours that are saved per year. The bigger numbers came like this: that it shrinks their time to be able to capitalize on their resources. So they shrink the project and they shrink the uncertainty of the project from 6 weeks to 6 months down to a predictable 3 weeks. And that's gold, right? Because you can start capitalizing on your investment. But even the bigger number was 86, which sounds funny. But what they said is this emergency that was created that you saved us from created 86 meetings for senior leadership and their deputies. And there's no amount of money that can help me get rid of 86 meetings. So that's the benefit of AI.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of these tools from the past, and it's something I've been talking a lot about. A lot of the tools from the folks like Deming, who created a lot of this, they took scientific management and they just brought a stopwatch into it and they got really, really detailed. A lot of these tools, I think, have been forgotten. Like one of the ones that we use in every aspect of our business is called a PERT analysis. It says, I observe somebody doing a work, then I run it through an algorithm. That algorithm says, just my presence as an observer means they were more efficient than they should have been because they knew I was watching. and just because this one went awry, that you can't count that in your average. You have to weight that differently. And just because this one went faster than it should have been, that also is a condition outside of the norm. I mean, I'm a guy that has a Galton board sitting on his desk, right? I'm always thinking about the standard deviation of everything. But it is interesting when you start to apply this and you start to look at the ancillary opportunities that are created. It's not just that 58 million. It's those thousands of hours. And, what do those 86 meetings cost? I was in a meeting recently with a group of executives and I asked that question and we figured it out. It was $20,000 for me to talk to them for an hour. And it's like, okay, when it's that much money and it's that much money, if I shave 5 minutes off the end, I'm I can save them a bunch of cash. So it's really finding those opportunities that are buried in that data, and then learning how to take that and put that into action in your business.
Yeah, currently we work with some clients that to have the Conexus AI assist with application upgrades. So, while your business intelligence needs to guarantee its accuracy, all the databases and all the hard metal down at the cloud level is always being upgraded, but you need to make sure that all the stuff at the top of the business intelligence remains correct. That manual process itself consumes a lot of time, consumes a lot of resources, of course, and it also can introduce errors. But the speed with which an AI can help that, and Conexus AI brings that together, also can allow you then to see opportunities, because you're no longer bogged down by the QA of looking for errors or the resource allocation of having people just do all this work manually. If you can do these application upgrades in a way that has a guaranteed assurance and is fast, then your mind is freed. Your company resources are freed to look at other opportunities.
Let me ask you a question on that, because what I'm seeing is that the organizations that are adopting AI, preparing for AI, participating in AI, are the bigger organizations that have centralized data. They have good data lakes. They've got a good data warehouse, and they are obtaining a strategic advantage because of that, one that the small guy can't get.
I'm not sure about size. I actually like the fast, slow analogy, because I've seen in some of our clients an inherent structure to be exploring what's next. One of our clients actually has a particular bucket of money allocated towards exploratory technologies, so that the budget doesn't have to hit the P&L of the other business units that otherwise are hitting their numbers. They don't want to be impaired by that. It's a smart structure. We've seen some other potential clients that have prided themselves on being a follower in adopting IT. And I think that will become less and less a responsible position to have, because the adoption of these new technologies and the alacrity with which your company has already practiced in adopting these technologies into your organization will really impact your ability to then take advantage of them. And the speed with which some of the bigger, faster companies, I'll say regardless of the size, will be able to hit on the margins and the market share of the slower ones, I think will begin to expand.
I actually think you hit the nail on the head there. It's who's moving now. And I think I look at Jamie Dimon with Chase, with JP Morgan. He's publicly said we have 300 use cases on where AI is going to change our business. That doesn't mean that we've implemented them in every area yet. It's just we wrote the documentation out, and we're looking at these things very objectively and saying what's coming down the pipeline. And I think that is the smart move right now. I don't know, ChatGPT, I think, caused a lot of entrepreneurs to think a specific way. The innovations that the entrepreneurs that just recently got exposed to generative AI, those aren't going to come out till next year. So the marketplace right now is full of solutions that either were put together very, very quickly or have been thought about for a very long time. All the real innovators out there that will move and go with the market, they haven't made their moves yet. Right? They're still sitting there going, I'm going to sit back just a little bit and wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I think you need to practice. I think your teams need to practice implementing these technologies. We had one money center bank that came to us after having allocated 20 million to consolidating 86 databases down to 16. They spent 5 years and another $100 million on this before they had to throw the whole thing out, allocating another 5 years and another $100 million with a downscaled project. Instead of his 86 to 1, they downscaled it to 86 to 16. So at the end of 10 years, they put like 220 million into it. They had a downscale project, and then they came to us and they said, Eric, the project's now done. It's complete. It works kind of the way that we wanted it to. But the problem now is it's fragile. Because as soon as we do a divestiture, as soon as we do an acquisition, the whole thing starts to break all over again. We need your technology at Conexus AI to be able to be more agile. for the future and to be more flexible as the world changes, as we do divestitures, as we do acquisitions.
I actually think one of the things that you said there is probably the best statement about how to handle AI right now. And I want to go back to it. And that is, I can tell you with 100% certainty with companies that I work with, many times if I say, let's test something, they're very cautious in the extent of the test, because if it fails, it reflects on that individual leader and that P&L, they're part of the P&L. You know, what you said about exploring it off the balance sheet, essentially. I mean, it is essentially but separating that little budget out and saying, here's some money that we're going to use. We're okay with losing that money if we need to. And let's not fall into this sunk cost of like, well, because we do this a lot in corporate America. We're like, well, why did we lose money here? Well, sometimes we just lost money because we looked at it as an R&D expense and we just needed to fix. We just did an engagement for a company last week and we spent a whole day there and we spent a bunch of money of analyst time. And I looked at it at the end and I said, we can save them money, but it is not worth us coming back and it's not worth them doing it. It's okay to throw away money sometimes to just find out if it's worth it or if it isn't. And I think the way you articulated that, I'd love you to talk about that a little bit more and how to think that way.
Yeah, well, to paraphrase Mario Andretti, the race car driver, he didn't quite say it like this, but if you're not occasionally having failures in the experiments, then you're not moving fast enough.
Damn, that's a good one. I don't know why I never heard that one. Well, the good thing is I was going to say I'll write it down, but I can just go listen to the podcast. Tell me in this last few minutes, because I think we're going to end up bringing this into 2 episodes, because this has been really fascinating. Where do you see yourself in the marketplace? And can we predict 5 years right now? I mean, I know everybody in Silicon Valley and Wall Street wants you to tell your 5-year plan. And I'm like, I don't have a 5-month plan right now. I mean, things are moving very, very quickly. Where do you see the marketplace going and how do you participate in that and its scale?
Well, I'll tell you just something that's strange and little covered, which is one of the largest or fastest growing job opportunities at Amazon is that of an ontologist. So working with ontologies. These are very well paid jobs, but it is kind of defining the landscape of meaning across an increasingly large organization. The U.S. government is also pushing on this. What you need to do is ultimately have these ontologies merged in a way that respects the nuance that you spent money and time capturing. And right now, it's a manual process. What we're doing is having the Conexus AI discover the commonalities among these ontologies, but you still need to work with people, smart people, very well educated and smart people that are manually putting these together. That's just an interesting thing that's little covered in the next trend around AI.
I got to tell you, I have not heard the term before. And as I look at it in my other browser here, I am like, this is exactly the type of work that I love to do, right? So I hadn't defined it properly. So thank you for that. I would agree with you. I think there's a lot of preparation work that needs to be occurring right now inside every business to prepare for what is on the horizon. Let's spend a couple minutes talking about Conexus in particular. What's the size of customer? If you're listening to this right now and you're going, okay, I got to get my shit together here. I need to give Eric a call. What is that size? When you're sizing up an opportunity, what are the key things that you tend to see that indicates that you can help them?
Generally, the number of databases, and it's going to be like 3 to 5 is kind of the number at which our cost curve begins to really take advantage over manual processes. There is an exponential cost curve on integrating databases, and ours is sublinear. But the work you have to do anyway, you really have to do upfront with our type of AI. That threshold of payback happens at about 3 to 5. So it's not that our benefits don't extend to the global 5,000. It's just that the largest companies are where our resources currently have to be allocated because there's more opportunity than we have time for.
Yeah. Well, listen, I used to work with a Fortune 5 company years ago. And one of the things that impressed me most, and people have heard me tell this story before, is that every leader knew their labor cost per second for all the people that reported up to them. So when they looked at things and they said, well, this will only take an extra 10 seconds a day, they could go, okay, well, that's 17,250 a day times 200 work. Like they could figure out, they all knew how to do that math. And that is really because of the size of the organization. If I just look at 2 people, I'm like, well, it only costs 25 cents to do that. I look at 200,000 people, very, very quickly, it extrapolates out. So you're talking about fractions of fractions here and rolling those up. You need to have a big amount of information.
I can address this. This is how it expresses itself day to day. We've all experienced the idea that we might have 2 Excel spreadsheets that we want to merge.
Yes.
Right. And so you may, if you had 10 rows and 10 columns, or maybe like 50 rows or 50 columns, we can maybe do that ourselves. If we have 100 or 500, we might say, man, I got to get somebody to do that task for me. I don't have time. Dreary work, but I'm going to have somebody else do that task. If I have 5,000 or 10,000, then I got to get a team to do that. If I have 10 million rows or 10 million columns, I got to automate it. Right. I can't hire a team in big enough to handle that sort of thing. That's what these large organizations are confronting.
I love that.
It's getting too big for them to handle. And while one department might have this small problem and just say, not to keep mixing analogies, I'll wash the dishes myself. But if you have dishes for one family, that's one thing. If you have dishes for a restaurant, like I need a team. If you have dishes for the army, like you need a different system.
I love that. Eric, how can people find out more about Nexus and or Nexus? See, I'm doing it with my other podcast with Conexus because I'm so used to the close saying Nexus, Conexus. Yeah. Now I have to just say Conexus. How do they find out more?
Conexus.com. Yeah, so conexus.com, conexus.com. That's where we are. That's the website. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn or all the usual channels.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been lovely.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.